All right, we are back on with Lucas, the co-founder and CEO of CERBAIR, and it is currently just struck midnight here in Australia. Lucas, what's the time over there where you are now?
Well, it's about 4 p.m.
12 p.m. All right, brilliant. Well, Lucas is going to talk to us about some new UAV evolutions or next-gen evolutions that other sensitive sites should open their eyes to. And you know, it's a real pleasure having you on here, because having someone who is a Counter-UAS vendor, you've been able to see it from the ground and see all that stuff happening. And you have some pretty interesting, you know, areas where your equipment and technology is used. So we're really pleased to have you on board. I'm loving your background and the amount of drones you have back there. And once you share your presentation screen, it should just be over to you. So thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me. I think I've already shared my screen. Please tell me whenever that's on. I think it is. All right, perfect. All right, so thanks again for having me. I'm quite excited about discussing this topic with you. I'll just quickly introduce myself for those of you who don't know me or the company I'm representing. So my name is Lucas Lebel. I'm one of the two co-founders and the actual CEO of a French company that is called CERBAIR. And what we do as CERBAIR is that we are a counter-drone solution provider. So that means that we develop specific technology solutions to actually protect all sensitive sites from the potential threats and attacks that drones can now carry out. So I know this is kind of like a drone forum, so let me just start by saying that we can all be friends, all right? Because sometimes people say that anti-drone companies are kind of like dragging down the drone business and all that stuff. So I just want to say, as a kind of like disclaimer and as a means of introduction, that we serve the same purpose. We actually love drones. You see already a ton of them behind me. What we're trying to do is to actually just enable a safer world, a safer sky. And that means that we have to provide the means to actually allow drones to be used in a safe way. We already know that 99% of people are actually using drones responsibly and in a great way. But unfortunately, a tiny fraction of people out there actually use drones in nefarious ways. So our mission is to actually develop solutions to counter that. And we believe that if we succeed in our mission, this should actually unlock the huge potential that drones carry within themselves, right? I mean, we're big fans of everything we actually see out there in the world, drones being used for good purposes. Just a few examples: agriculture, archaeology, in urbanism, search and rescue operations. We're very much excited to actually see all of this unfold, but let's not turn a blind eye on all the different drone attacks and problems that they also create. To give an idea to maybe those of you who are not very familiar with the threats that they can represent, to give you an idea, let's just say that there are 4 different categories of problems. The first one has to deal with attack. Drones being used more and more as air vectors that can bypass all security measures to deliver some, usually weapons, explosive devices, to deadly effect. A lot of organizations like ISIS or some narco organization like the Cartel de Jalisco in Mexico have been demonstrating it. Espionage is also a big issue. The Palo Verde nuclear power plant in the US has been spied on for a few weeks now by drones, and we don't know what the intentions of the pilot are, but it's actually quite worrying. Thirdly, we could also name the risk of contraband, drones actually being used to deliver contraband across the border, but as well right into the courtyard of some prisons across the world. That's a big issue. And finally, let's not forget about the risk of collision. Drones can actually trigger a lot of damage, especially around the airports. According to some engineers who modeled it, it would be very scary to have a drone enter the reactor or some specific parts of incoming aircraft. And so we need to be very careful about that. One of these examples was the terrible mess that some drones created by being flown on top of the Gatwick airport about 18 months ago. And we don't want this to happen again. So again, to unlock the potential of drones, it's urgent for us to actually control them. And that's where we come into play. Again, our mission is to actually design the solution and to also integrate our solution with larger unmanned traffic management solution, UTM solution, as you probably know them, to make sure that drones are used only for good ends. So on to the topic of conversation now. For those of you who are not familiar with the counter-drone industry, let's try to play a game and be in the shoes of the security manager of a site to be protected. So as a security manager, you have to know what's going on out there regarding the drone threat. And you actually often see that drones are actually evolving very fast. You see that drones are changing shape, size, are becoming more and more dangerous, are becoming more and more affordable, and you see that they're hard to detect and neutralize. And when it comes to actually protect your site, you already have a rather limited budget. So one of the main concerns of our customer is to actually make sure that the technology that they are about to actually invest in doesn't become obsolete in a short period of time. That's probably their number one concern. So what it means is that for us as counter-drone manufacturer, one of our important missions is to have a clear view on the forthcoming evolutions that drones will go through over the long term to better design our solutions and be able to offer a reliable solutions to our customer that will be able to cope not only with the current level of threat, but also with the necessary evolution that it will actually go through. So that's why we came about with this topic. We decided to discuss kind of like what we believe are the 5 biggest next generation UAV evolutions every sensitive site should actually open their eyes to. And as we discuss that, we'll conclude by trying to share what we believe are unbiased tips for actually sensitive site security managers to actually take into account when they actually start their purchasing process. So here you see the 5 different UAV evolutions that I want to discuss today with you guys. The first one has to deal with the size of drones. As the market started back in 2010, I think it was actually a French company, Parrot, that kind of like democratized civilian drones to a much larger crowd, and it started a big market for micro drones. And so those are rather small, but now as time goes by, we see more and more diversity in terms of size. So we'll discuss how that can affect your security. Second of all, we'll discuss the autonomy of drones, one of the most important topics in my opinion. We see that autonomy is different than automation. Third, we will see how drones are becoming more and more coordinated with all the benefits and advances and progress made in artificial intelligence, one of the main revolutions that drones will go through, and how it can impact the security of any sensitive site. Fourth, we'll discuss about the increased ranges that some new technologies like 5G will actually trigger and enable for civilian drones, and all the consequences it will carry out. And finally, we will talk about something that is less known, but quite exciting. It looks like science fiction, to be honest. All what has to deal with the deception and the new lift technologies that drones are evolving towards. I'm talking about insect drones, I'm talking about bird drones, and all of these technologies that will actually change the way we actually mentally represent drones to our subconscious. And finally, as I said, we will discuss some of the best practices for any security manager to take into account when it comes to actually going through the purchasing process of buying some anti-drone technologies. All right, so let's start with the first part. Let's talk about size and how it actually does matter. Miniaturized versus big UAVs. So on one hand, you have a market that started with like micro drones, and on the other hand, you have more and more extreme drones being actually built and commercialized and gaining some traction. You have indeed some nano drones actually becoming more and more successful, and you have much larger drones being used to actually access some new ways and new capabilities to actually deliver a service. So that's interesting to discuss. Here on this slide, you see 2 of these examples. So the top picture is kind of like a fly. It's as big as a fly, but it's actually a drone, and it can actually gather some intelligence and send it back to its operator. As you can see, it's not any bigger than a fingertip, And so imagine that type of technology later on into the hands of somebody with malevolent intentions. That could be a big problem. The drone that is below it is well known actually by professional and especially by the military. It's the famous Black Hornet. It's a drone that is being used across the world, especially by different units of special forces, and it's very powerful. It's great to gather intelligence, but to do it in a very discreet way. And so when we see a lot of these drones becoming smaller and smaller, and actually delivering, packing a punch in the sense that they can actually have embedded some advanced sensors. And so despite their small size, they can still actually gather some relevant information. And while doing so, maintaining their stealth, it actually raises some questions for counter-drone manufacturer and their respective solutions. Because as you try to detect the presence of drones, you have 4 different ways to do it, to put it simple. You can use the radar to detect the presence of this object. You can use electro-optics. So let's just put it this way, fancy cameras to actually recognize the distinctive features of a drone. You can listen to the communication of a drone. And finally, you can detect the unique acoustic signature of a drone, and especially of its rotor spinning around. And so as we try to detect drones, most of the technologies are facing difficulties the smaller the drone is for this reason. Imagine that you have a camera, you try to detect a smaller drone. Over the distance is going to represent a smaller and smaller amount of pixels to the point that at some point you won't be able to detect it, period. If you use a radar, you send an electromagnetic wave that is going to rebound against an obstacle. But if that object is rather too small and uses some non-reflective material, then you might simply not detect it. And for acoustic, it's exactly the same. The smaller it is, the less noisy it is, the more silent it is. And as a result, the stealthier it is. Actually, what we discover is that radio frequency is the only technology that is agnostic, meaning non-impacted by the size of the drone, because as the technology states, means we actually focus the attention on the communications that the drone uses. And communications have nothing to do with the size of the drone. They have to do with the transmitter and the emitter. So out of all the detection technologies, radio frequency is the one that is going to be the less impacted by that. The others are going to struggle more and more, of course. On the other end of the spectrum, we see bigger drones actually hitting the market. If we remember correctly, at the end of the 20th century, drones already existed, right? There were military innovations that were used to a great effect by actually, especially the US Armed Forces first. And it's kind of interesting to see that now the civil market is actually producing and using drones that are bigger and bigger. They are not challenging the size of those military drones that I just described, but they are going towards that direction. And we can actually already see it in some specific sectors of the market, namely the agriculture. You can see on the bottom picture, you see drones actually being able to transport, let's say, some fertilizers, for instance, and being able to spray them on top of crops. You see drones being used in industry and infrastructure sector, being able to carry a ton of sensors and specific tools and devices to actually assist the operations of, let's say, the construction of railways, the maintenance of pipelines, for instance, and so on and so forth. And so as a result, what it means is that drones being able to be bigger usually means that they are able to carry a bigger payload. And the bigger the payload, the bigger your potential problem, right? Because it means that the drone can actually transport maybe a bigger explosive charge. Maybe it can transport some more advanced electronics, meaning that it will be more efficient in the malevolent action it's intending to actually carry out. So on one hand, it makes our job easier because a bigger drone is easier to detect as opposed to the smaller one. Of course, if you have a radar or if you're using a fancy camera or some acoustic sensors, it's going to be much easier to detect that big of a drone compared to a nano one. But again, radio frequency won't be affected by it. But on the other end, it means that the potential hazard by drones can actually be even bigger than that. So that's also one of the trends we are trying to keep track with. It's something that, as we said, can have both positive potential and bad one. I wanted to share some video clips through this presentation to kind of like make it a bit more interactive, just to show you how big these drones can be and how much lift they can actually produce. I'm going to share a quick video. So let me show you that. All right, so basically the video is a commercial. It's an old commercial from Samsung during Christmas time of about maybe 2 years ago that actually portrayed a Santa Claus that was snowboarding using not a kite to be pulled, but actually a drone. So let's just see if you can see that. Yeah, you should be able to see the video. Hopefully it won't lag too much. All right, so let's play. All right, so that's the of course the relevant part. I wanted to show you because there is a lot of science fiction around drones, and some people don't know how powerful and what their capabilities are. It's already possible to have drones actually lifting some human beings. And so right now, I would say that it's kind of like a gimmick, and people are just using it to I don't know, for maybe advertising videos or to show the capability. But some people are already thinking about using it for malevolent intents. Today, actually, I read an interesting article that actually discussed the concerns that the US penitentiary administration actually felt about drones. And one of the new ones was about exactly this. They said that we're actually concerned that drones in the near future could not only be used to transport contraband into the courtyard of our prisons, but maybe in a few years actually come and lift one of the inmates outside the prison and allow an evasion. So that's I don't know. I guess it's interesting. It's scary at the same time. So that's one of the evolution of the drone threat that we have to actually keep track with. All right, back to the presentation. Sorry, it's going to be a little bit of back and forth between the different documents, but that's the only way I can ensure that it's actually smooth. Let's see if I'm back with the presentation. All right, perfect. So on to the second topic. Now we want to discuss the increased autonomy of drones. And before going into this, I think it's actually important to define what autonomy is, because there is a little bit of confusion about it. So we want to make a clear distinction between autonomy and automation. And to discuss that, I think it's important to note that drones, in our opinion, have gone through 3 major revolutions. The first one has to deal with their actually intrinsic existence, their intrinsic nature. Drone, it actually means that you actually use them, you fly them remotely. So that was the first revolution, an object that you can actually use and fly and direct remotely. The second revolution, that was a bit more recent, was about drones being automated, meaning that you can actually pre-program a drone so that the drone will simply execute what you actually wanted it to do. So for drones, for flying drones, that would be something like picking some GPS waypoints that the drones will actually follow. And along the way that you pick, you can actually choose a number of preset actions that the drone could do. Like, for instance, as you go here, spray the fertilizer on top of the crop. As you go there, drop an explosive device, and so on and so forth. But the third revolution that we are about to see, we've already seen actually it emerge, especially with the military, and it's about to hit the civilian market as well. It has to deal with autonomy. By autonomy, we mean an autonomous capacity for the drone to actually make its own decision and act accordingly. So, of course, this calls for the advances of artificial intelligence, right? Drones can actually, or will actually use the information that they can gather by themselves. For instance, most drones have one way or another a sensor, usually a camera. Now imagine that you can have some detection algorithm embedded within the electronics of the drone, and that the drone could actually recognize something relevant in the video feed it's capturing, and that the drone could actually make a decision based on that. That's actually quite exciting, right? Because it means that you don't need an operator anymore. You can have entire processes that are perfectly coded at the drone level, and the drone can actually take it on. So that's quite exciting. I mean, the potential for good purposes is huge, to be honest. But again, it's equally huge for nefarious attempts. And so we're going to share a couple videos in a second. I'm pretty sure that a lot of you guys already know about them. They've been given strong media coverage. But before doing so, let's discuss the impact of that at the security level of your site. So we've discussed a little bit about the detection technologies, but not so much about the neutralization ones. So again, to put it simple, you have different ways to neutralize drones. The first way that I would argue is the most popular and right now the most efficient has to deal with jamming technology. So jamming technology, meaning that you're going to create an electromagnetic impulsion that is going to actually interfere with the communications that the drone actually relies on, so that you can actually isolate the drone from two things. One, you isolate it from his pilot, and second of all, you isolate the drone from the reception of the GNSS signals. So you isolate the drone from the reception of satellite navigation system. And basically, as you completely isolate the drone, if it's remote or if it's automated using GPS, it won't be able to pursue its mission. And as a result, most of the time, the drone will actually land automatically. What happens, strictly speaking, is that as soon as it's isolated, the drone will actually trigger an emergency procedure to go to safety, kind of. And the number one emergency procedure is about the drone landing on the ground automatically. So that's a pretty powerful technology because it's kind of instantaneous. It travels at the speed of light. You can target several drones at the same time, so you don't risk your technology to be actually saturated, overwhelmed. And at the same time, it's very efficient across a wide range of drones, right? So that's one technology. Another one has to deal with kinetic waves, meaning that you use the kinetic energy of a projectile, no matter what it is, a bullet, a missile, what else could it be? A net, for instance, that could actually stop the drone right where it is and make it fall down. And finally, that's where I believe it's becoming even more interesting. You have the future of counter-drone countermeasures. Those are called first of all, you have the high-energy mobile laser. So that would be the high-energy laser technology. And then you have the high-power microwave technology. So those are technologies of the future because they are actually target this evolution of the drone. Let's go back a little bit. As drones become more and more coordinated, as they become more and more autonomous, they will have some decision-making capabilities inside them. And as they can make their decisions by themselves, it means that they won't be able to actually interact with the pilot or with some satellites. So a drone that is actually fully autonomous means that actually it doesn't rely on any communication. So number one, it means that in terms of detecting technologies, radio frequency is put under severe difficulties to catch them. And in terms of neutralization, it means that jamming won't be able to actually neutralize it because simply there is no communication to actually saturate and hinder because everything is done on a closed circuit at the drone level. So you need to have a physical neutralization of the drone. There is no other option but to actually attack and neutralize the drone, physically speaking. And out of all the technologies to actually do that, there is some strong potential on directed energy weapon. Directed energy weapon are the two technologies I described. High power microwave on one hand and high energy laser on the other hand. The reason behind it is that they are already actually quite efficient to target drones almost in an immediate way. It's quite instantaneous. They can target several drones at the same time, so they don't get saturated too easily. And third of all, that is quite important, the cost of using such technology is not as important as, say, a ballistic missile or something else like that, right? Those technologies are pretty advanced. They cost a lot to actually acquire, but as you use them, in the case of laser, for instance, you're simply using electricity. So the cost of shooting it and shooting it again is not as much as the marginal cost of using let's say, a Patriot missile that is worth more than 2 to 3 million US dollars. So the way they work is quite interesting for everybody's curiosity. So the high power microwave is kind of like a super powerful jammer. But imagine that this time, the interference that the technology is going to create will not actually hinder the communications that the drone relies on, but at the physical level, it's going to fry the electronics on board the drone. And as a result, without its electronics, the drone will simply drop out of the sky. With the laser, it's a little bit different. It's a beam of concentrated energy onto the drone with laser technology, of course, that is going to actually punch a hole through the drone over time. So it's not instantaneous. You need to actually kind of like follow the drone and keep your laser on target for maybe a couple seconds, from what we've seen at least. But it's pretty efficient, of course. As you pierce a hole through the drone, usually it results in the drone falling down. So there is a huge interest of the military in such technologies, because over time, drones are going to become more and more autonomous, at least for certain missions that will allow it. And in turn, it means that jamming technology will have some blind spots that will need to be complemented by directed energy weapons. So I think it's quite interesting. So again, let's share a quick video. Actually, it's my favorite. A lot of people have already seen it, but I'm going to risk it to show it to you another time. So it's a video called Slaughterbots. Basically, the story behind it is interesting. It's a group of researchers in the military that decided to actually compile a fake video that kind of looks real. You're going to see the production is amazing, to kind of increase the awareness of the general public, and especially of the congressmen and congresswomen of the US administration, to actually understand that we are going through major milestones in terms of technology. And some of these technologies, especially in terms of artificial intelligence and drones, can actually take armament to a whole new paradigm. And this new paradigm, which is very new for us, is the fact that weapons could, in the near future, be actually able to make the decision to kill somebody on itself based on algorithm and artificial intelligence. So I think it's fascinating. It's also scary at the same time. And that's why a group of researchers decided to actually increase the awareness in the attempt of actually stopping some of the progress made and the investment made in such technologies. So here we go. It's called Slaughterbots. It's a bit of a longer video.
Customer pilots directed almost 3,000 precision strikes last year. We're super proud of it. It allows you to separate the bad guys from the good. It's a big deal. But we have something much bigger. Your kids probably have one of these, right? Not quite. Hell of a pilot? No. That skill is all AI. It's flying itself. Its processor can react 100 times faster than a human. The stochastic motion is an anti-sniper feature. Just like any mobile device these days, it has cameras and sensors, and just like your phones and social media apps, it does facial recognition. Inside here is 3 grams of shaped explosive. This is how it works. Did you see that? That little bang is enough to penetrate the skull and destroy the contents. They used to say guns don't kill people. People do. Well, people don't. They get emotional, disobey orders, aim high. Let's watch the weapons make the decisions. Now, trust me, these were all bad guys. Now, that is an airstrike of surgical precision. It's one of a range of products. Trained as a team, they can penetrate buildings, cars, trains, evade people, bullets, pretty much any countermeasure. They cannot be stopped. Now, I said this was big. Why? Because we are thinking big. Watch. A $25 million order now buys this. Enough to kill half a city. The bad half. Nuclear is obsolete. Take out your entire enemy, virtually risk-free. Just characterize him, release the swarm, and rest easy. These are available today. We have a distribution network taking orders.
All right, I'm going to stop the video here. It continues on for about 5 minutes. If you want to see the end of it, I invite you to check it out on YouTube. You can just type in Slaughterbots, as you can see on the title on top. Then it goes on to kind of like a horror movie scenario when actually that technology that was originally controlled in the hands of the few, let's say, for instance, in that particular case of the US military, and then that technology could actually go into the hands of, let's say, some terrorist organization, for instance. And that could be, of course, very problematic. So if you're curious to see how it unfolds, you can check it out. I think it's beautifully executed. You could actually believe it's true. Firstly, because the production is greatly executed, and second of all, because and I'm guessing a lot of you guys who know a lot about drones are not even surprised by it, because as you can see, all of these individual technologies, like a nano drone, for instance, a drone being able to actually use a camera and recognize shapes and particular figures and characteristics in it. It already exists as well. Drones being able to carry a small explosive device also exists as well. Stochastic feature, nothing fancy, to be honest. So when you think about it, and that was the purpose of this scientist, all of these individual technologies and capabilities actually exist one way or another. It's, we believe, just a matter of time before somebody actually compiles them all together to actually have something that works. And well, in that particular case, what is scary is that the actual technology behind it that makes it stand from other technologies, it mostly lies in actually software and not hardware. And the thing is, with hardware, it's actually, I would say, easier to actually control the spreading of a know-how of building some specific hardware. Let's say that you want to build a missile, for instance. No matter how good you are, you won't be able to do it by yourself. It's going to take some money, some efforts. You're going to need some plants. You're going to need some combustible. You're going to need a ton of things that actually makes it, I would venture to say, impossible, if not very hard, for any actor to actually build a missile. But for software, I mean, anybody could actually take a piece of that software and actually make it available, open source. You could find it on the internet, and then some people could actually use that software and code it with some common objects like drones. Nano drones like that, you can buy some of them in China. They just cost a few tens of dollars. But what if you can buy a big load of them and then program them to actually work together? That's accessible to actually not just states and big defense groups. That's accessible to actually a much wider audience. And that's what makes it scary, right? So that's one of the reasons why I believe that the control of weapons it's actually already happening, but it's going to be even more important, I believe, in the next years. The control of weapons is not going to be only directed towards traditional weapons, like like an assault rifle, a missile, or a bomb, but also specific parts of codes and software that, in the wrong hands, could actually trigger terrible results. So we're going to go to the next phase of the presentation. Hopefully, that did my transition towards the next part, because the next part is about the coordination of drones. So indeed, at the end of this video, we saw that an organization actually made them work together and shipped a big load of them together in a big military transport aircraft to actually deliver them with like one mission, and they all kind of work together. Again, this is not science fiction. It already happened. I'm going to show you another clip in a second. That's the picture that you see on top of this slide. I think it was the US Air Force or the US Navy, in any case, the US Armed Forces, that actually carried out an exercise with a number of aircraft. I think it was a pair of F-18, actually carrying a big quantity of small expendable drones that were actually built with 3D printers. Those drones are called Perdix Drone. You can actually look them up. And I'm about to share the video that actually shows that a group of expendable drones in large quantity can actually work in one mission to great effect. So, of course, the use for the military are pretty obvious. Imagine that you can drop tens, if not hundreds of them, actually to kind of like survey the whole battlefield and get like a great idea of the different defenses in place, whether they are ground to air or even ground to ground, to have like an exhaustive inventory of the different capabilities and weapons on the ground for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance purposes. That's kind of like the dream tool. All the more since it's expendable and it's very cheap to actually produce. And why is it expendable? Because A, it doesn't cost money. It doesn't cost a lot of money. Let's just put it this way. And B, there is no pilot. So you can risk losing them because at the end of the day, it's just plastic. So I think it's kind of like a big revolution that now is happening kind of like in the military. But for those of you in the audience who are more concerned about civilian matters, of course, it's going to go through civilian uses. I would expect it to be kind of like restricted. So the uses will be clandestine, terrorist organization, and so on and so forth. But still, this is something to keep an eye on. So more coordination between drones. That's the key idea. Let me show you this quick video clip again. Hope you like videos. All right, so let's do this one, for instance. Let's do the Perdix drone. If you guys are interested about all of this topic, I would gladly share more information about all of these use cases, I'm discussing. So let's play it. All right, so you see a pair of F-18 multi-role aircraft actually about to drop this Perdix drone. So that's when it becomes interesting. You can actually see that somewhere in the command and control center, all of these drones are mapped and are actually working together, communicating together to actually achieve their mission. So I don't have all the details about the mission, but you see that they kind of like fly in information as a tight group. They are gathering information, moving on to a new target a few seconds after. So, I mean, I would say it's very impressive. And that happened, I believe, in 2016. So you can imagine where this technology is actually right now. All right, and they go on with their mission. So that's one of the examples. Another one that I wanted to share, also to illustrate my point that this technology is already hitting the civilian market. It's happening in China. As you probably have seen for some of you, Fireworks are becoming, I wouldn't say obsolete, but they're slowly being replaced, especially in Southeast Asia, by drones. Drones working together to actually shape some interesting drawings just as a replacement of fireworks. And it's, I believe it's very impressive. Let's check it out together. All right, here we go. Usually, it's the opportunity for the big, processor making companies, chipset making companies like Intel, for instance, and software companies to demonstrate their know-how. So here we are in Southwest China, and I believe that it's how many drones are there? I think it's about 500 of drones being used. So let's play it together. All right, I'm going to stop it here. I guess you got the idea. So yeah, more coordination between drones. And finally, let me share again my screen. Back to the presentation. More coordination, not only between drones themselves, but as well between drones and their operators. That's also quite interesting. Not surprising also. This is a technology that is being used by the military, but expected to go into the civilian world. There was an interesting article about a couple of weeks ago that described some Israeli technology that is being used by the Israel Defense Forces as well as different units of the armed forces. That's the visual that you see, where basically a foot soldier is actually using some specific goggles that can actually see through the camera lenses of the drone. We call it first-person view. And that can, at the same time, actually, by augmented reality, provide some image recognition feature through the lens. So imagine that you're a soldier, you're focused on the ground, but maybe one of your eyes can actually be focused on what your drone being used as a scout ahead of you to prevent any ambush could actually detect. And at the same time, the detection algorithm can actually provide to you some real-time information. So, I mean, that's really powerful. That's really powerful. And this is something that is going to be used, I bet you, by some malevolent actors when they carry out attacks. So increased coordination between drones on one hand, and between drones and their operator on the other hand. On to the next topic, increased ranges. So what do we mean by that? Drones can already be used up to pretty long ranges when you think about it. You can already fly commercially available drones up to a few kilometers. So it's regulated, as you probably know, especially in the Western world. Let's take the example of the DJI drones, for instance. In Europe, most of them can be flown up to, let's say, 4.5 kilometers. In the US, it's a little bit different. So I would argue that it's already pretty far away. But it can go even beyond that already today. Very specialist drones, like hobbyist drones, for instance, can be paired with like specific emitters that can have like a more powerful signal that in turn allow them to be flown, virtually speaking, up to, let's say, a few tens of kilometers, provided that the topography is satisfactory. And that's even more impressive, right? But it could go even beyond that, and it will go beyond that. The technology that I want to put the emphasis on right now is the 5G, because we will see in the near future some drones actually having, using and transmitting communications between their pilot and themselves based on the 5G network. Why does it need 5G? Because if you want to exchange some information between a drone and the pilot, especially if there is a video stream, for instance, you need to have, of course, a good flow of data. You need to have a good debit of data. And 4G already allows it, but 5G is going to make it even more smooth and simpler and accessible to actually do it. And that's a problem because for some technologies, well, first of all, for all technologies, it means that virtually speaking, you won't be able to catch the pilot if this pilot is operating from hundreds of kilometers away. Hell, you could even have a pilot from thousands of kilometers away. As long as there is the network to actually connect the drone to the pilot, the distance could be much further than what we've always known up until now. So that's a problem. It's going to be much harder to find the pilot on one hand. And on the other hand, some technologies, like for instance, radio frequency, I'm not saying it's impossible. Some people have already succeeded in providing some detection technologies and neutralized technologies on 4G and 5G drones based on radio frequency, but it makes the challenge a bit more complex. I'm not going into too much details, but technologically speaking, it creates some challenges. So that's a question you could ask as a security manager about to buy some anti-drone technologies. What's the view and what's the capability of the technology to actually target such drones? All right. Here we just talk about IMSI catcher. For those of you who don't know what they are, IMSI catchers are pieces of equipment that allow to intercept an IMSI. So to just put it simple, you intercept the communication of a cellular communication, right? And so if you want to intercept a phone communication, for instance, that's the type of technology you're going to use. And so later on, if you want to detect drones or even maybe neutralize it, IMSI catcher also will play a part in it to actually detect and neutralize by sending a network denial to the drone to actually break the connection and force it to land. So there are some technologies that are going to target that specific issue. But yes, it's important to know that it's coming. I'm also making the bet that one way or another, governments will try to contain this technology because I mean, to contain the 5G embedded within drones, or to restrain it only to some professional that would benefit from a legal authorization to do so. That's just my opinion. That's what I believe. But let's see how it unfolds. Right, on to the last evolution I wanted to discuss. That's one that is also kind of like science fiction that I'm really passionate about. Is the new deception technologies of drones. Because of course, some people using drones, they don't want to be detected, right? They want to stay stealthy. And one way to do that is to make sure that your drone is not detected and doesn't appear as the traditional way you would actually represent a drone to yourself. Everybody thinks about a quadcopter when you think about the drone. It can take different shapes, but it's usually a quadcopter, an hexacopter, an octocopter. And they kind of like all look the same, right? With like spinning rotors on top. But some people are working specifically on drones, either for leisure purposes or for nefarious attempts or for military attempts to actually make them even stealthier. And the two examples here that we are describing are the insect drones on one hand, that's the one you see on top, and the second one is bird drones. And so for obvious reason, they are becoming more and more stealthier. First of all, they are becoming stealthier because, I mean, as human beings, we could actually confuse them for the object that they represent, but also for the technologies that one might use to actually detect them, because it could be mixed up with an object that is actually not a drone. Let's take the example of a radar, for instance. Well, to be honest, radars are already struggling enough for the most part to actually make the distinction between drones and birds. But imagine now if drones can actually be birds, I mean, look like birds. It's going to make it even more complex. The radar signature is usually smaller. Depending on the material that is being used, it's going to make the radar job even more complex. And so as a result, it's going to create some difficulties. So let's share a couple of videos to show you that it's real and that it happens. The first video I want to share is going to be fast. I want to share the experiment that some US researchers have carried out with a Dragonfly, on which they implemented what is it called? A chipset to actually kind of like control it from the distance. How impressive is that? All right, so let's do this. Here we go. So here you recognize a Dragonfly, but you also identify some chipset. And the concept is pretty simple. It's actually a live Dragonfly. They didn't kill it, but they genetically modified the Dragonfly and implemented some pieces of hardware to actually send some signals at kind of like the brain level, at kind of like the nerve level of the Dragonfly, to actually send it some basic orders. So of course it's still an early project, but they've already been able to actually demonstrate some basic features, some basic orders, and again, I think it's very impressive. All right, and the second video I wanted to share, give me a second, was about this famous bird drone. I think it's there is a French company working on it. Bionic bird. I think it's French. Might be American though. Let's share it. Here we go. So the Bionic bird is now sold for leisure purposes. It's kind of like fun to fly a bird instead of flying a mere drone, especially considering that the bird can actually integrate more seamlessly with like groups of birds. But again, imagine what it could do.
This is called a Bionic bird. It doesn't have to be registered with the FAA because it weighs hardly anything. Let's give it a try.
All right, and it goes on and on. So you get the idea. You have a drone that is no longer going to look like a drone, which in turn will actually make it super stealth, not only for our human eyes, but as well for the technologies that try to detect it. The acoustic sensors that try to detect it won't recognize the typical spinning rotors that we know of drones. And if it tries to detect the flapping wings of such drone, then it might also detect all the birds out there, which would be counterproductive. And the same problem goes for radar technology and optical detection. So that's going to be a big challenge for all of the detection technologies. All right, so as a conclusion, I wanted to move on to some tips I would like to share for all the security managers out there who I hope I didn't leave hopeless about protecting their sites against such a quickly moving target. Drones are indeed moving fast. They're evolving in very diverse directions. And I think we should be quite excited about all the potential economic opportunities and innovation opportunities this creates, because no doubt there are hundreds of them. But we must not turn a blind eye on all the nefarious attacks and uses that they will carry within themselves, of course. So I think one of the difficulties as a security manager is to actually, well, let's just put it this way, like keep your feet on the ground, think thoroughly about this threat, and stay focused. The drone can evolve in many different ways. It doesn't mean that all of these potential evolutions actually concern yourself. I think that's the number one key idea. Drones can actually evolve in ways that are not relevant to you. And I think what is important at first is to refocus on yourself, the particularities of your site, the level of risk that you have, the typical types of drones that are being used by such and such actors, the typical attack scenario that would be relevant to you. Maybe the collision scenario is not relevant to you. Maybe the attack scenario is, but maybe because the people who have bad intention regarding yourself don't have the financial means or the technology to actually go fully autonomous and swarm, and maybe you're rather facing some amateurs, maybe it's not relevant to be too much preoccupied by autonomous drones right now, at least. So I think it's important to think at the local level of your site, its particularities, its level of threat, the typical attack scenarios, to actually come up with the real solution. And the real solution, believe me, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. And I'm certainly not here to say that we have all the answers to all the sensitive sites. What we try to do here at CERBAIR is to provide a coherent and affordable first line of defense that protect most sensitive sites against a realistic level of threat at an affordable cost. That's the key idea. Because one of the main problems that drones raise is that they create like a big asymmetry between the attacker and the defender, meaning that whoever wants to attack with a drone doesn't have to pay a lot of money to carry out his attack. But on the other hand, the one who defends himself is facing a huge amount of financial loss should the drone succeed in its attack. And if that defender wants to protect from the drone, most of the time, he's going to have to deploy advanced technologies that can cost a lot of money. And I mean a lot, in the millions. That's actually ordinary. So our job at CERBAIR is to kind of like bridge these two positions and provide a solution that reduces this asymmetry in an attempt to democratize quality anti-drone solution for as many people as possible. But again, depending on the nature of the site, our solution might be relevant for you, or it might be just partially relevant, in which case, I think it's going to be, well, it's already relevant, and that's the direction of the counter-drone industry that we see. The industry is actually consolidating, and we are seeing more and more integration when actually experts of such and such technologies start working together to provide a unified solution where all technologies can synergize together and prevent one of the technologies to actually have a blind spot because another technology is actually going to take the lead in the detection or neutralization. So that's kind of our main challenge, is to transition from a radio frequency expert anti-drone company towards a company that will actually make affordable some unified multi-sensor, multi-effector counter-drone solutions to be able to provide an arsenal of different technologies that we will mix together to actually provide a comprehensive and a coherent solution for your particular case. No silver bullet, no one-size-fits-all solution, but relevant technologies for some customer and the necessity to integrate them over time. So that in the end, we will be able to provide a full kill chain approach. That kill chain lies in us providing different steps that will work together to one end, stopping an attack. First, we will detect it, most likely with radio frequency. We'll be able to detect not only the drone, but as well the pilot. Then we will characterize the threat. We'll allow you to actually know what kind of drone is actually flying, if it's getting closer, where it's flying, where the pilot is, so that you can maybe send a security team. Later on, as we have an integrated solution with different sensors, we can actually allow you to confirm the presence of a drone by queuing up some additional technologies, maybe a fancy camera that would be able to align with the coordinates that the radio frequency or the radar provided it, so that we can actually show you what the drone looks like if it's carrying a package, so that in the end, when you're pushing that button to neutralize the drone, you know what you're facing. You actually weigh in the potential loss or damage that the drone could actually trigger, and the potential collateral damage as well of the drone neutralization. So that's the key idea, and that's about it, guys. I don't know if you have any question. I hope you found it interesting. My role was to try to share some of the evolution that we foresee. As you've seen, all of them will have an impact on the security of your site. It's going to make this game more and more dangerous, but also more and more interesting. And our job is to actually design solutions that will not be obsolete over time. So they are thought to be modular and to integrate more technologies to accompany you as the threat becomes more and more important to make the solution more and more robust as well.
Brilliant. Well, it was really, really interesting. So thank you for that, for sharing it, Lucas. And we do have a few questions. We are kind of right on time, so maybe I'll just get you one or two for you, and then we'll move on to Evangelos. But I'm happy to send you the rest of those, or you can answer them as you go to the comments. So there was one question from Tim that said, Lucas, have you seen any signs of self-destruction or self-destructive actions when drones detect jamming?
So what we've seen regarding that is drones actually carrying some devices that make them resilient to jamming. And the way it works, most of the time, I know at least a couple Israeli company that commercialize such solution, is that the drone has actually a network of different antennas that receive the GNSS signal. And as the drone receives a powerful signal that tries to actually hinder the reception of the GNSS signal, the drone dynamically identifies the attempt to be hindered, and so it switches to some antennas that are actually turning their back onto the incoming signals, and with a mix of software actually compiling this information to kind of like nullify the jamming signal and focus on some antennas that are less affected to actually keep on their mission. So that's the key principle behind that. There are some other technologies. Just to describe maybe another, jamming works by saturating a specific channel of communication. And some drones, especially military drones, they have some redundancies and they have some alternative channels of communication should one of them be saturated by a jammer or something else, by the way. So if you have a jammer, if you're trying to jam a drone, you need to have the capability to actually jam as much radio frequency spectrum as the drone can actually switch to. That's the key idea. So if you want to make it resilient to jamming, you could have some alternative channels, and hopefully some exotic channels that the jammer intending to stop you is not covering. I can't hear you. Sorry.
My bad. I did leave it on mute. It's 1 a.m. here. That's why.
Yeah.
Now, we maybe do have one more time to squeeze one more in before we skip over. Theo sent in this message via Twitter and said, as a counter-UAS vendor, who are your main customers? Are they prisons, airports, or say military bases?
Right. So no doubt, state agencies and institutions. About 80% of our customers, they have to deal with some regalian, like a state institution, for instance, the Ministry of Justice. So we work with different prisons and penitentiary administration. We work, so especially against the contraband risk. We work a lot with the French army, but some other armies across the world, with all the different corpses. So we have some Navy applications where we protect boats. We work with some air forces for which we protect some air bases. We work with the land forces for which we protect the boots on the ground, as well as integrating our solution with vehicles. What else? We work with, we are starting to work with airports. It's kind of like a new market for us because airports are searching multi-layer solution. So in that case, we kind of like provide a technology that is integrated into a bigger subset of solution. But yeah, I would say military prisons, industrial sites as well. In Europe, for instance, we protect the largest chemical products derived from oil and gas. That was the target of attacks. But we also protect things that you might not even think about, like VIPs, for instance. Some VIPs are being the target of paparazzis, for instance, and they want to protect their assets and confidentiality. We even have some famous series or movies being recorded that want to protect themselves from a potential spy who could actually leak some information of the scenarios out there. And some events as well. We've protected a ton of events, especially in France, the latest one having been the G7, for which we protected all the presidents as they gathered around in the southwest of France. So basically a large diversity of customer from very military all the way down to very civilian, but there is a strong focus of customers where the risk is not about confidentiality, but about life and death. And that's the military and institutional customers.
Brilliant. Well, I hope that answered your question, Theo. And for all the other questions, we will send them straight to Lucas, and you can answer them on here. But on behalf of all of us here at DroneSec and the GDSN, thank you for taking your time, Lucas, and sharing some of those with us in the mind and the thoughts of a Counter-UAS vendor. So very much appreciate it, and hope you have a good rest of your day.
Yes, thank you very much. Everyone enjoy your weekend, and thanks for having me again. Bye.
All right, bye.